I had just signed the biggest contract of my career, $15 million. Dollars. 3 sleepless nights in Tokyo, tense meetings that left no room to breathe, handshakes paired with polite, empty smiles. When the plane touched down in Austin early that morning, I thought I'd finally get to rest, grab an iced coffee, and hear the sound of applause from my team. I was wrong. The Tavern Dynamics building gleamed as always, sunlight bouncing off the marble floors of the Texas lobby. But the moment I stepped through the revolving doors, I stopped short. Right there in the center of the lobby, beneath the company's polished silver logo, were 3 black trash bags. They were swollen, one gaping open just enough to reveal a family photo frame, my white ceramic mug, and the little bonsai tree I'd brought back from Tokyo 2 years ago. Its dry leaves had crumbled and scattered across the floor. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. A new security guard stood by the reception desk, avoiding my eyes. I was about to ask when the elevator doors opened. Martha Hale stepped out with her familiar smile, cream-colored suit, platinum hair in a tight bun, heels clicking softly against the marble. Her signature perfume lingered in the air, that unmistakable mix of power and chill. "Welcome back, Elena," Martha said lightly, as if nothing was out of place. "We need to talk." I glanced around, searching for a familiar face. Evan from finance had just crossed the lobby. He froze mid-step, pretended to take a call, and turned away. A few others hurried into the elevator, their silence sharp enough to cut through the hum of the air conditioning. "These trash bags," I tried to keep my voice steady. "Your things," Martha interrupted. "HR packed them up for you. Tavern Dynamics is going through a restructuring, and unfortunately, your position is among those being eliminated." I heard every word, but my mind went blank. The chill of the air made my skin prickle. "Restructuring? I just brought in a $15 million deal. Murakami Freight. You approved the proposal before I flew out." Martha tilted her head slightly. Her smile stayed, but her eyes were cold steel. "That contract is impressive," she said, "but we need a new direction. I truly hope you'll see this as an opportunity for yourself." I looked straight at her. "I've been here 6 years. I wrote the entire logistics strategy for East Asia. Without me, the Murakami project wouldn't have closed this quarter." "No one is irreplaceable," she said slowly, checking her watch. "HR has already sent your termination letter to your personal email. All internal access has been revoked. Thank you for your service, Elena." And with that, she turned away, her perfume trailing behind like a signature of finality. I stood there, gripping my bag strap. Familiar faces passed by, eyes flicking between pity and curiosity. The guard looked away. I crouched down and picked up the bonsai. Dirt smeared across my sleeve. Broken branch fell off. I caught it in my palm. Fragile, weightless, like something that had just lost its meaning. When I stepped outside, the Austin sun hit me like a wall. Heat rose from the pavement, wrapping around me as I crossed the glass doors. My reflection stared back, wrinkled shirt, dark circles from the flight, and behind me, 3 black bags holding 6 years of my life. I stopped at the steps and took a deep breath. In that moment of humiliation, I heard Martha's voice echo in my head. No one is irreplaceable. Maybe she was right. But some people, when erased, don't disappear. I slipped the broken bonsai branch into my pocket and kept walking. The wind brushed through the trees in the parking lot, whispering like old memories. The bags weighed heavily in my hands, but what pressed harder was the feeling of being wiped clean, as if 6 years had never belonged to me. I didn't know where to go yet or what to do next. But one thing was certain, this story wasn't over. I stopped by the curb, lifted my eyes to the burning Austin sky. My breath still uneven from the long flight, I felt something flicker inside me, small, but bright enough to cut through the haze. A spark of defiance, a silent promise. They would remember my name. Where are you listening from? Have you ever had your work tossed out like trash? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you love tales where the quiet ones rise, where justice is reclaimed with intellect instead of noise, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because from that moment on, my life and theirs had just begun. When I opened my eyes, the morning light had slipped through the curtains, falling across the warped bonsai on the windowsill. The soil in the pot was dry and cracked, the yellowing leaves still coated with dust from yesterday. I didn't remember when I had fallen asleep, only the steady clatter of the printer through the night and the words, "Remove Carter," before the Q2 board meeting, burning into my mind like a carved scar. I made a cup of coffee. The bitter smell spread through the room, mixing with the scent of fresh paper and the faint dust from the 3 trash bags still in the corner. They sat there like silent witnesses to an execution. I sank into the chair, laptop still open, blue light reflecting off the wooden desk. Part of me still refused to believe what had happened. Only 24 hours ago, I was standing in a conference room on the 18th floor in Tokyo, signing a $15 million contract, hearing Kenji Murakami say, "We trust you, Ms. Carter." Now I had been thrown out like a stranger. But the truth doesn't wait for belief. It just sits there, bare, unashamed, unmovable. I opened my backup files and read every page carefully. In the internal report, the profit figures had been altered. The Murakami deal had vanished from the quarterly revenue list. In the corner, Martha Hale's digital signature shimmered like a knife freshly wiped clean. Nothing about this was random. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, picturing each face from the executive floor. Evan, who could never hold eye contact. Sharon in finance, who complained about restructuring 2 months ago. And Martha, with her perfect smile and her eyes that never stopped calculating. Remove Carter. Not because I was incompetent, but because I knew too much. My hand tightened into a fist. The sting of humiliation slowly shifted into something else, cold and sharp. I opened a new document and titled it Project Truth. I began to write down every fragment I could remember, the emails between Martha and Cronex Global, the timeline of the Murakami signing, the altered reports. Each line I typed felt like pulling poison out of my veins. Then I stopped at one entry, Cronex Global. The name was familiar, a conglomerate known for swallowing mid-tier companies and gutting their workforce to maximize profit. I opened the browser and searched. The headlines filled the screen. Cronex preparing to expand into smart logistics, the exact sector where Tavern Dynamics held dominance. The chart in the article laid it out clearly. Everything connected. Martha wasn't trying to save the company. She was preparing to sell it. And my $15 million contract had made Tavern too valuable to sell cheaply. I had ruined her plan. I didn't know whether to feel foolish or furious. 6 years of loyalty, and I thought I understood her. I once believed Martha was the kind of woman I could learn from, strong, decisive, never intimidated. But her strength wasn't about leading, it was about control. A soft ping broke the silence, a message from Olivia, a former colleague who had left Tavern last year. I heard what happened. Be careful with Martha. She never lets anyone leave without leaving a scar. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Did you ever see anything about Cronex? A dot appeared, then 3 blinking ones. Finally, a single line. Don't text, call me. Her voice on the phone was low and firm. Olivia had been in finance before she was dismissed after a closed-door meeting. I once found they were wiring money to an off-ledger account, she said. I confronted Martha, and 2 days later, I was gone. Official reason, workforce optimization. I gripped the phone tighter. Do you still have proof? No. But I know who does. Olivia hesitated. Evan. He worked directly with Cronex. And he's scared. The name hit me like a memory. Evan. The man in the lobby yesterday. Eyes down. Hands trembling around his phone. Maybe he knew. Maybe he was trapped too. I opened my laptop again. Found Evan's personal email in my old contacts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Martha were monitoring him, any message could put him in danger. I deleted the draft and closed the lid. This needed to be done carefully. I walked to the window. The first light of the day spread across the dusty room. Outside, Austin buzzed as if nothing had happened. I looked at the bonsai, dry leaves, brittle branches, but the trunk still held a hint of green. I poured a little water into the soil and left it there under the sunlight. In my mind, a plan began to take shape, clear and deliberate. Martha might have erased me from the system, but she couldn't erase what I remembered. The meetings, the reports, the numbers only I understood. If they wanted to bury the truth, I'd drag it into daylight, not for revenge, but because I couldn't stand the thought of being erased, as if I had never existed. I returned to the desk and opened a new page in Project Truth. Beneath the title, I typed, Day 2, Begin Investigation. Target, Martha Hale. The keys clicked steadily, light but sure. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting my shadow on the wall. In that shadow, I saw something new. No longer fear or despair, but a cold, calm focus. The kind that comes before a negotiation, when you know you have nothing left to lose, but the other side does. The next morning, Austin was unusually gray, the sky low and cold. I was still at my desk, the laptop open, Project Truth glowing on the screen. The last line I had written the night before was still there. Day 2, Begin Investigation. Target, Martha Hale. I stared at the black letters on the white background and thought, to understand Martha, I had to stop being the victim. I had to see her the way she saw me, a variable to be calculated, controlled, and removed. I opened my browser and typed her name, Martha L. Hale, Tavern Dynamics, CEO, Texas. A flood of results appeared, familiar photos everywhere. Martha speaking at Women in Tech Leadership, Martha at the Forum on Women and Resilience in Crisis, Martha posing beside the state governor. Her face looked the same in all of them, that half smile, those eyes that never revealed anything. I read her biography. Born in Nebraska, once the head of strategy for a major transport corporation, left after a buyout, then founded Tavern Dynamics from a small team in her home garage. 6 years ago, I joined the company as it expanded into the Asian market, and Martha personally recruited me. She said, I spent years standing outside the door just to get a seat at the table. I won't let anyone do that to you. I believe that line. Looking back now, maybe Martha never wanted me to be shut out. She just wanted to make sure she was still the only one sitting in the middle. I wrote a few notes on Project Truth. Martha, the perfect leader archetype. History of takeovers and replacing former partners, possibly repeating the same pattern with Tavern Dynamics. A new headline popped up in the search results. 3 years ago, at a Dallas conference, Martha had said, leadership isn't about holding power. It's knowing when to cut off the rotten part so the rest can live. I read that line several times. Cut off the rotten part. In her story, I was that rotten part. Leaning back, I closed my eyes. From somewhere in my memory came the image of that last afternoon before I flew to Tokyo. Martha had stopped by my desk with a thick folder in her hand. Don't forget, at Murakami, you're representing Tavern, not yourself, she said. I thought it was just a formality. Now I knew she had started separating me from my own work before I even left. The phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. A man's voice, rough, uneasy. Elena, it's me. Evan. I froze. Why are you calling me? I shouldn't be, but you need to know. Martha is meeting with Cronex this morning. It's not a merger. They're discussing selling client data. I don't know all the details, but I heard your name in the meeting. You should be careful. My name? She said, if you cause trouble, there are ways to handle it. Elena, you don't understand her. Martha has a plan for everything. Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I sat there, phone still in my hand. Evan's voice echoed in my head. She has a plan for everything. I turned on the voice recorder and whispered, Evan's call confirms Cronex and client data. I was no longer facing just a powerful woman, but a machine built from precision and control. Across the city, Martha sat in her top floor office at Tavern Dynamics. Her office was bright, wide, and still. The glass walls reflected all of Austin like a mirror. On the desk sat a cup of black coffee and a folder stamped with the Cronex logo in the corner. We need to make sure Murakami doesn't back out, the man across from her said. If Carter contacts them, she won't, Martha replied calmly. Elena still believes in professional ethics. She'll need time to be angry, then she'll move on, just like the others. And if she doesn't, then we'll handle it another way. Martha set down her cup and looked out the window. I once lost everything because I believed people would play fair. I won't let anyone make me lose again. When the man left, she sat alone. The afternoon light cut across her face, deepening the lines around her eyes. On the desk lay an old photo, her with a group of young employees, me among them. We were smiling brightly in front of the Tavern Dynamics building, back when it had just opened. Martha picked up the photo, stared at it for a long time, then placed it back in the drawer. It wasn't pure cruelty that moved her. There was something else buried deep inside, an old fear, the kind that makes a person build a wall of steel around themselves. 6 years ago, after being forced out of her director role at her previous company, she'd said, "They told me I was too hard, not soft enough to lead. I learned one thing: softness is what makes people break." That evening, Martha's phone buzzed. An anonymous message appeared. "Don't forget, the old debt isn't settled, Martha." She stared at the screen, a flicker of unease in her eyes, then deleted the message. But her hand kept gripping the phone, slightly trembling. At the same time, I sat at my desk, rereading my notes. The pieces were coming together: Cronex, Martha, the hidden profits, and now the client data. I had no power, no position, but I had the truth. I knew how to tell it. And if Martha thought I would stay silent, she had forgotten one thing. I had learned survival from her. I turned off the light and looked out the window. The city at night glowed orange from the street lamps, traffic moving like streams of light. Somewhere up in that high tower, Martha was probably looking down at the same city, believing she still controlled everything. But she didn't know that once a story begins to be rewritten, I don't stop. I touched the cover of the Project Truth folder. The paper felt cool, smooth, and heavier than the night I first printed it. Maybe because it now carried a new chapter inside: Martha Hale, the woman of power and scars. I met Kenji Murakami for the first time in Tokyo in a conference room on the 40th floor of the Keio Plaza Hotel. He was the kind of man who didn't speak much, but every word carried weight. When I presented the partnership strategy, he just nodded in silence. Then, at the end, said one sentence: "I trust you, Carter." That sentence carried me through 3 days of negotiations that felt like a storm. Now, seeing his name light up on my phone under the heavy Austin noon, I knew this call would change everything. "Elena Carter," he said when I answered. His voice was low but clear. "I tried reaching you through your company, but it seems they don't want me talking to you anymore." I took a breath. I'm no longer with Tavern Dynamics. Why? That question should be for Martha Hale. There was a long pause on the other end. "Our contract has a problem," he said. "The finance division sent me a revised version. Your name is gone from the responsible parties. I don't work with anyone but you. Can we meet?" I looked around my small apartment, papers scattered across the desk. I can. That afternoon, we met at a small cafe downtown. Kenji arrived right on time, wearing a white shirt and carrying an old leather briefcase. He didn't look like a powerful executive, more like a strict father hiding disappointment. "Your company says you left for another position," he said after ordering coffee. "I don't believe it." "I was removed," I told him, meeting his eyes. "Not because I failed, but because I succeeded at the wrong time." He nodded slightly, his gaze softening. "I understand. I've seen that happen many times. In Japan, we say, when a tree grows too fast, it's cut down to keep the forest even." I gave a half smile. I guess I was that tree. Kenji took a thin envelope from his briefcase and slid it toward me. "This is the original contract with your signature. I kept it as part of our agreement. If Tavern wants to cut you out of the process, they'll have to start from scratch. I can choose who I work with, and I choose you." I stared at the envelope, a strange mix of relief and trembling rising inside me. "What do you want me to do?" "Continue the project, but not under Tavern Dynamics. I'll sign directly with you." I froze. "I don't have a company." "Then create one," he said, as naturally as if starting a company were as simple as picking up a pen. "I've seen how you work. You don't need anyone's shadow over you." I sat there, listening to the quiet clink of a spoon against a cup. His words hit a place I'd avoided for years. For 6 years, I'd worked harder, better, always under someone else's banner, never once imagining I could stand alone. I left the cafe with the envelope in hand, feeling as if I'd just received a command that came not from him, but from myself. That night, I opened my laptop and typed the words, "Register LLC Texas." Each step appeared on the screen: register name, address, business type. I straightened my back, fingers, trembling slightly as I typed the first line: Novalink Strategies LLC. A simple name, but it sounded like a door opening to a new world. I submitted the form, paid the fee online, and when the confirmation page appeared, I smiled for the first time since being fired. It wasn't the smile of victory, it was the smile of someone starting from zero, using memory as capital. The next morning, I met the first two members of Novalink at a small cafe beneath my building. Mia, a marketing graduate I once mentored during her internship, and Lucas, a young programmer from Tavern's tech team. They both knew I'd been let go, and neither asked why. They only asked, "When do we start?" "Right now," I said. We set up in an empty room on the ground floor of my apartment building, a space small enough that we could hear the hum of the printer and the smell of cheap coffee in the air. I drafted the Murakami freight proposal, Mia worked on presentation slides, and Lucas built our own data system. Each keystroke sounded like a heartbeat for something new taking shape. That afternoon, an email arrived. Sender: Martha Hale. Subject line: regarding breach of confidentiality terms. I opened it and read every word. She referenced the non-compete clause in my old contract, warning that any activity involving Tavern clients could result in legal action. The final line was short and sharp as a blade. Don't make yourself an enemy of the company that gave you everything. I sat in silence for a while, then wrote back 2 sentences. I was never the company's enemy. But I will not stay silent when erased. I hit send. It felt like placing the first brick in a new wall. There was no plan for revenge, not yet. I just knew one thing: if they wanted to forget me, they'd have to work very hard not to see me again. In the corner, the bonsai still sat on the windowsill. The driest branch had fallen off, but near the base, a tiny sprout was pushing through. I looked at it and smiled. No one ever knows the exact moment they begin again until they see a small sign of life growing from what they thought was dead. I wasn't used to starting over at 32. Everything inside the small room where Novalink was born sounded temporary. The scrape of plastic chairs on the floor, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the echo of keyboards in the empty space. But beneath that fragility was one clear thing: the energy of 3 people building something out of the wreckage. Mia typed quickly on her laptop, reading aloud a few lines from the presentation draft. We don't just provide logistics solutions, we redesign how people move goods across the world. I listened and nodded. It sounded ambitious, but right. I wanted Novalink to feel bold, a name people associated with reinvention, not someone recently discarded by her old company. Lucas sat in the corner, focused on a black screen with lines of code running nonstop. "I'm setting up the internal data management system," he said. "We can't let anyone touch this network." I caught the meaning behind his words. We all knew Martha wasn't the kind of person who let go easily. 3 days later, I met the lawyer Olivia had recommended, James O'Donnell, a man who had handled several cases between employees and large corporations. His office was small, tucked on the second floor of an old building on 6th Street, filled with the scent of coffee and fresh paper. James wore a white shirt with no tie, spoke slowly, and had that calm assurance that made people trust him. "You didn't sign a non-compete after being terminated?" he asked evenly. "I didn't sign anything, just an email notification. Then they can't enforce it. If your termination lacked proper cause, the clause is void. Do you have evidence of any other motive?" I placed the Project Truth folder on his desk and turned a few pages. "I do. Plans for a merger with Cronex Global, altered profit reports, and the note to remove Carter before the Q2 meeting." James raised his eyebrows, studying the document carefully. "This could shift everything. If Tavern sues you, we'll counter. But I doubt Martha will risk court. She'll use a quieter method: pressure through reputation." I nodded. I'm ready for that. That afternoon, I returned to the Novalink office. On the wall, the whiteboard was crowded with timelines. Week 1, finalize Murakami contract. Week 2, register proprietary data system. In the center, I wrote another line in red marker: protect reputation. That night, I posted on LinkedIn. Not long, just a few short paragraphs, every word measured. When women are pushed out of the boardroom, they have two choices: stand outside in silence or build their own table. I chose mine. I didn't mention Tavern Dynamics or Martha, but I knew people would understand. By morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in from everywhere. So inspiring, Elena. We need more voices like yours. And some stayed silent but read. I knew Martha was among them. At noon, my inbox showed a new message. Official notice from the legal Department of Tavern Dynamics. I opened it. Dear Ms. Carter, we have been informed that you are currently engaging in collaboration with client Murakami Freight under an independent entity. Please be reminded that the use of data, documentation, or procedures related to Tavern Dynamics constitutes a breach of confidentiality and may result in legal action. Sincerely, Tavern Dynamics Legal Department. I printed the letter, set it on my desk, and laughed quietly. 3 days. Martha was still herself, always striking first before anyone could breathe. I drafted a reply and attached a copy of the authorization document bearing her signature from last year. According to the authorization letter dated June 14th, Mrs. Hale granted me permission to work independently with foreign clients within my scope of authority. Copy attached. I fully respect Tavern Dynamics' rights and trust the company will equally respect mine. Sincerely, Elena Carter. I hit send and shut the laptop. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm conviction. Martha might have more power, but I held the one weapon she didn't expect: truth and memory. That evening, while Mia and I adjusted the presentation slides for the upcoming Murakami meeting, my phone buzzed. A message from James. Well done. I just saw their internal response. Martha is quiet for now. Keep going. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the low ceiling and its peeling paint. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I was just tired. Every battle, win or lose, drains you. But tired doesn't mean stopping. I knew Martha's silence wasn't an ending, only a calm before the next wave. I stood up and stepped onto the balcony. The Austin night stretched out, glowing with the lights of distant towers. I breathed in deeply, the scent of exhaust and dry wind mixing in the air. Inside, Lucas was still typing, Mia on a call with a partner. Novalink was alive now. I went back to the desk, opened Project Truth, and added one last line. Martha Hale temporarily in retreat. Next phase, prepare counterstrike. Outside the window, city lights shimmered on the glass. I saw my reflection, not the woman thrown out of her company, but the one laying the first brick of her return. I knew the road ahead would be long and Martha wouldn't stay still, but for the first time, I wasn't being pushed anymore. I was moving, truly moving, on my own 2 feet. Martha never let even a scratch go unanswered. I knew that, but I didn't expect her to strike this fast. 3 days after I sent my reply, an article appeared in the Austin Business Weekly. Former Tavern Dynamics employee accused of stealing client data to form her own company. Below it was my photo, taken from the company's website, and a short paragraph. According to internal sources, Elena Carter, former client director, left the company following a dispute over international contract ownership. I read it over and over, feeling both angry and almost amused. They said internal sources, but who else could have leaked this except Martha? It was her signature move, not a lawsuit, just a smear to poison public perception. Mia rushed into the office, phone in hand, her face pale. Elena, people are talking on LinkedIn. Some have already shared the article. Don't read the comments, I said, my voice so calm it surprised me. If they want to believe, they will. Lucas looked up from his screen. What are you going to do? Find proof. If they use rumors, I'll use truth. I emailed James, attaching the article. His reply came almost immediately. Don't respond publicly. I'll trace where this came from. Meanwhile, gather everything related to the data they claim was stolen. I reopened my archives. All my project files were stored on Tavern's internal servers, but the Murakami materials had been placed separately by Martha's direct instruction last year. I searched my old emails, and there it was. Elena, keep all Murakami files on the temporary server for easier access from Tokyo. I'll take full responsibility for security. The evidence was in her own words. I forwarded the email to James. He called back within 10 minutes, voice steady. Perfect. That's their first mistake. But I doubt Martha's done. She'll have another card to play. He was right. That afternoon, Kenji called me. His tone carried hesitation. Elena, I just received an email from Tavern Dynamics. They said you're no longer the legal representative for Murakami Freight. They've asked us to halt all work with Novalink. I was silent for a moment. And do you believe them? Kenji sighed softly. I trust results, not words. They sent financial documents, but something doesn't add up. I'll forward them to you. When I opened the file, my pulse spiked. It was a revised financial report. Someone had altered the figures to show Tavern's revenue dropping sharply, identical to the doctored data I'd seen in the Cronex merger plan. Martha was recycling the same falsified numbers, turning them into ammunition against me. That evening, James came to the Novalink office. He spread the documents across the table, his eyes sharp. See? They don't need to win a case. They just need to keep you too busy defending yourself. But this, he tapped the report, this proves Martha is manipulating real data. Can you verify the original file? Lucas can, I said. He used to have access to Tavern's system. Lucas sat down, fingers flying over the keyboard. A few minutes later, he opened an auto backup log. Got it. The source file was created 3 months ago. The last editor listed Martha Hale. James smiled. Then the game ended sooner than I thought. But Martha still wasn't finished. The next day, I got a message from my mother. She said a woman had come by, introducing herself as a representative from Tavern Dynamics. I drove over immediately. My mother met me at the door, puzzled. She didn't say much, Mom said. Just asked if you were all right. Then she said, sometimes people must choose between being right and surviving. I stood still, the wind stirring outside. What was her name? I think it was Martha. I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Martha hadn't gone to threaten my mother. She'd gone to plant fear. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I turned on the voice recorder and spoke quietly. Day 28. Martha Hale appeared outside of work boundaries. She's afraid. That evening, I sat with my mother in the kitchen. She poured tea, her voice calm. What are you going to do? I don't know. Sometimes I want to let it go. But if I stay silent, I become just like them. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes steady and deep. When your father left, I didn't fight him, but I never let him forget I existed. Sometimes resistance doesn't need noise. You just have to stand firm, and they step back on their own. I was quiet. She always had a way of making me understand without explaining. I held her hand and whispered thanks. That night, I sat alone in my room, the light from outside casting faint lines across the glass. On the desk, the Project Truth folder had grown thicker, its pages stacking like layers of waves. I opened my laptop and began drafting a report, not to send yet, just to have ready. Title: The Connection Between Tavern Dynamics and Cronex Global, Data Manipulation Analysis. As I typed, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop now, Elena. Don't dig deeper. There are things you don't want to know. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't delete the message. I saved it in a folder named Threats. Then I kept typing. Outside, the wind picked up. The bonsai on the windowsill trembled, a few new leaves falling onto the desk. I picked them up and held them in my palm. They were soft, fragile, but still smelled of life. I thought of Martha, of the fear that drove her need for control, and of myself, the woman who had once been just as afraid, but was learning to turn fear into strength. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, I saved the draft and whispered to myself, if you want a war, Martha, I'll fight, but with truth. In the small room, only the wind and the soft hum of the fan remained. In that quiet night, I knew I had crossed into a new phase. Not the victim anymore, but the opponent. And somewhere across the city, I was certain Martha knew it too. 3 weeks passed, and everything seemed calm, but I knew that kind of calm was a lie, the quiet before the storm. Novalink was starting to gain traction, signing 2 small contracts with local firms. Murakami Freight kept their word, transferring the first payment, $1.2 million, for the pilot phase. Mia and Lucas worked almost nonstop. So did I, but part of my mind was always elsewhere. Martha hadn't made her next move yet, and that worried me more than when she attacked. On Thursday night, James called. His tone was hard, stripped of the usual calm. Elena, I just got word. Tavern is preparing to file an official lawsuit. I closed my eyes. What's the charge? Intellectual property infringement. They're claiming Novalink's data platform was copied from Tavern Dynamics. A dry laugh escaped me. Martha's patient. Now she's striking at the very technology I built for them. You need to be ready, James said. If this goes public, the press will circle again. I'll try to stall it, but you need evidence that Novalink was built from scratch. I hung up and turned to Lucas. We need every system record from the first day you wrote code. He looked at me, worried. You think they'll fake evidence? I don't think. I know they will. We stayed up all night. Lucas restored the original source code, locked the timestamps, and backed it up to 3 independent servers. I archived every technical exchange, every design draft. By morning, our eyes were red, but we had a complete record proving Novalink's system was our own. 3 days later, the lawsuit went public. My name flooded the headlines again. Online, people split into 2 camps, one calling me a traitor, the other a woman who refused to bow. I didn't read the comments, but the headlines were enough. Data War: Tavern Dynamics sues former employee for tech theft. Kenji Murakami called that afternoon. His voice was calm, deliberate. Elena, if you need to, we can pause the contract until this clears. I knew he was protecting his company, and I respected that. No need, I said. I won't let Martha win through fear. Across the city, Martha was in a meeting with her legal team. The room buzzed with charts, binders, and long presentations. She sat still, tapping her fingers lightly on the table. We don't need an absolute win, she said at last. We just need Carter exhausted, broke, tired, out of patience. A young man beside her hesitated. She's getting a lot of support. What if public sentiment turns? Martha smiled faintly. The public forgets fast. They prefer a fall from grace over a comeback. But one person in that room stayed silent. Naomi, the head of communications, who had once worked directly with me. When the meeting ended, she sent me a single text. Be careful. Some on the board are beginning to doubt Martha. Don't react yet. I stared at the message, torn between hope and suspicion. I didn't know if Naomi was helping or testing me. Still, I stayed. Quiet, just as she said. The next 3 weeks blurred into a haze. I worked with James and Lucas around the clock to prepare our countersuit. Mia dropped all marketing plans to help gather evidence. Meanwhile, Tavern flooded the media with anonymous interviews, leaks, and confidential documents. One night, Naomi called. Her voice was low, fast, and urgent. I don't have much time. Tomorrow they'll release their technical proof. A data file showing Novalink's code matches Tavern's. That's impossible, I said. Lucas wrote everything from scratch. They got hold of an old Tavern system copy, she said. They're embedding Novalink's code into it and altering the timestamps to make it look like you stole it. I went cold. Naomi, you're risking a lot telling me this. I know, she said, but I saw how you worked. You don't deserve to be buried like this. She hung up, leaving me in silence. I turned to Lucas and Mia. We need to move before they do, I said. If they plan to release it tomorrow, we will release it tonight. We drafted a statement with all technical logs and legal proof attached. James reviewed it, then called a journalist he trusted. Publish at 10 p.m., he said, before Tavern can make their move. When the article, The Truth Behind the Tavern Novalink Lawsuit, went live, social media erupted. Every log, every source file, every email proved I hadn't stolen a thing. More importantly, the evidence exposed the Tavern's attempt to manipulate data to fabricate proof. By the next morning, their article never appeared. In the Tavern's office, Martha read the news with an unreadable face, but her hands tightened around the paper. A junior assistant entered quietly. The board wants you to explain, he said. I know, she replied, her voice hoarse. They'll understand. I only did what was necessary to protect this company. But deep down, she knew something was cracking, and I, on the other side of the city, knew it too. That afternoon, Naomi sent one final text. She's lost the board's trust. Be ready, Elena. The game's turning. I stared at the screen, feeling months of tension begin to lift. But I didn't celebrate. I knew this wasn't over. When someone like Martha is cornered, they don't collapse. They strike back. I shut off the monitor and looked out the window. The city was drenched in red light from the setting sun. Everything was still, except for the faint sound of traffic far below. I understood. The next phase wouldn't be about defense anymore. I had survived her first attacks. Now it was time to rise and reclaim what was mine, not just my name, but justice itself. That morning, my phone rang early. James's voice was calm but edged with urgency. Elena, you should go to the tavern building today. The board of directors called an emergency session. I just got word. Martha will be questioned publicly. I was silent for a few seconds, then asked quietly, Am I invited? No, he said, but you should be there. Stay outside. Observe. Trust me, they'll mention your name. I wasn't sure I wanted to see Martha fall in front of me. Part of me still remembered she was the one who gave me my first chance. But then I thought of the trash bags, the humiliation, and her cold words in that email. Don't make yourself an enemy of the company that gave you everything. No, I couldn't soften. The Tavern Dynamics building came into view after the turn, its glass walls gleaming under the midday sun. I parked across the street. Through the trees, I saw people in suits walking fast, phones pressed to their ears. The air felt like the moment before a storm. I stood outside, unnoticed. From there, I could see everything. Martha walked in through the main lobby, posture straight, face calm to the point of arrogance. She wore the same gray suit, the silver watch catching the light. She paused in front of a mirror, adjusted her assistant's tie, then stepped into the elevator. About an hour later, the board members began filing out. Their faces were tense. Martha was the last to leave. She no longer walked quickly, her shoulders slouched slightly, her hand clutched her briefcase tight. Under the cold white lights of the lobby, I saw something I had never seen before: fatigue. James called at that moment. They've suspended Martha. Temporary, but it's over. I didn't say a word. Elena, are you all right? I'm fine, I said softly. Just not sure I believe it yet. That afternoon, Naomi texted, I left the tavern. Thank you for not staying silent. Without you, no one would know the truth. I stared at the message for a long time. Victory didn't feel the way I imagined. There was no cheering, no satisfaction, just a quiet emptiness, like after a storm when the house still stands, but the yard is full of debris. 3 days later, I received an email from Lyra Grant, chairwoman of Tavern's board. We'd like to meet to discuss a possible collaboration in a new capacity. I read it twice, unsure I was seeing it right. I agreed to meet at a downtown hotel. James came with me. In the small meeting room, Lyra rose when I entered. She was around 60, silver hair streaked with brown, her voice calm yet commanding. Beside her were two other directors, faces I had only glimpsed in meetings where I was never invited to the main table. Mrs. Carter, Lyra said, we know what happened to you was unfair. We also know Martha overstepped her authority in many decisions. You've shown resilience and rare capability. We'd like to offer you two options. I stayed silent. First, she said, return to Tavern Dynamics as executive director of international accounts, reporting directly to the board, no intermediaries. I raised an eyebrow. And the second? Lyra smiled. The board is interested in Novalink. If you agree, we'd like to purchase a majority stake in exchange for a substantial sum and a 3-year collaboration contract. I looked at James. He gave a small nod, signaling me to let them continue. Lyra leaned back, her eyes steady. We understand if you prefer independence, but we also know the world isn't kind to those who go alone. Consider this a chance to define success on your own terms. I left the hotel at dusk. The wind was strong, shaking the trees along the boulevard. Walking down the sidewalk, my mind was full. Return or sell, both tempting, both traps. If I returned, I'd gain real power, but under the same roof that once rejected me. If I sold Novalink, I'd be rich, but lose the soul of what I built through sleepless nights and grit. I stopped in front of a small cafe. In the window's reflection, I saw my face. tired, but my eyes no longer trembled. I sat down, opened my notebook. On the first page of Project Truth, I had once written, not just to survive, but to be seen. I realized neither of Lyra's offers would let me be seen. One was a seat back at the old table, the other, absorption into another system. I closed the notebook, took out my phone, and texted James. "I'm drafting a third proposal," he replied quickly. "Sounds interesting. Tell me more." "Tomorrow," I wrote back. That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote nonstop, a plan for Novalink to partner with Tavern while keeping full autonomy, and for me to serve as strategic advisor to the board, helping restructure their entire client division. Not a return, but a rise to equal ground. When I finished, I looked out the window. The city glowed bright, every window like a small flame in the dark. I thought of Martha, not knowing where she was or what she was thinking. Maybe in her high-rise apartment, maybe staring into a similar darkness. In some way, we were still alike, neither of us willing to be forgotten. I whispered to myself, tomorrow I'll reclaim what they tried to throw away. Not just for me, but for everyone who was ever called the broken part of the machine. On the table, the bonsai stood steady in the lamp's glow, its young branches reaching upward, stronger than I ever expected. The next morning, the Austin air was misty. I woke early, put on a simple white shirt, tied my hair back, and slipped into my usual black shoes. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was, the woman who once walked through the tavern lobby carrying 3 trash bags, and the same woman who would walk in today holding her own proposal. James waited at the hotel entrance where the meeting would take place, holding a cup of coffee. His smile was brief, his eyes still wary. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I have been ready since they threw me out," I answered softly but steady. We went into the meeting room on the 12th floor where Lyra and 2 other board members were waiting. Martha was not there, her chair sat empty, but a small nameplate remained on the table, the trace of someone who once held power. Lyra greeted me with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I did not come to choose between your 2 offers," I said, placing the dossier on the table. "I came to present a third option." James opened the file and handed copies to them. My voice was even and clear as I began. "Novalink will not be sold, and I will not return to Tavern Dynamics as an employee. Instead, I propose a parallel partnership. Novalink becomes an independent strategic partner tasked with rebuilding Tavern's international client systems over the next 6 months. All data, contracts, and project control remain with Novalink, while Tavern receives a percentage of reactivated contract revenues." One director frowned. "You want operational control without belonging to us," he said. "I do not want control for its own sake," I replied. "I want to prove Tavern can grow if it dares to change the old model. I am not asking for a job. I am proposing a way out." The room fell silent. I held their gaze, calmer than ever. Lyra flipped through the pages, her eyes pausing on my final note. "The future of the company does not belong to those who cling to power, but to those who dare to rebuild it." "You wrote this?" she asked. "I only wrote what Martha once taught me," I said. But perhaps she forgot what it meant. The comment landed like a stone. No one spoke after that. Lyra closed the folder. "We need time to review," she said. "But know this. What you presented is the approach this company has needed for a long time," I smiled. "I will wait." 3 days later, they sent an official decision. The board approved the partnership. Novalink became Tavern Dynamics Global Strategic Partner, and I, as CEO of Novalink, was granted authority to lead the 6-month client restructuring. The announcement avoided the word win, but everyone understood who now stood taller. The news spread fast. The press called it an unprecedented deal between a former employee and her old corporation. Coverage shifted from skepticism to admiration. One paper wrote that Elena Carter had done what many only dared to imagine, turned dismissal into the beginning of a new empire. I read that story in my new office, a small, bright room on a floor I had once looked up at every day. On my desk, my mother's bonsai sat in its usual corner, its fresh shoots thicker, greener, stronger. That afternoon, I received a package with no return address. Inside was an old photograph, me and Martha at the first Murakami contract signing. On the back, a single handwritten line: "Do not let hatred dim your light." I studied the handwriting a long time. The slant, the neatness, unmistakably Martha's. I did not know where she was. Perhaps out of town, perhaps watching from afar. For the first time, I felt no anger, only gratitude, because without her, I might never have discovered how strong I could be alone. 2 months later, Novalink's first project closed. The new system ran smoothly, clients returned, and revenue rose by nearly 40%. Lyra congratulated us and suggested expanding into Europe. I agreed, but this time as an equal partner, not a subordinate. That night, I sat alone in the office, the city beyond the windows like a galaxy of lights. I opened my laptop and typed the final line into Project Truth. 1 year ago, I stood in the company lobby with 3 trash bags, thinking my life was over. It was only the first day of a different journey. People can remove your name from a list, but they cannot remove the value you created. The final truth needs no proof. It only needs to survive. I closed the laptop and looked out at the reflection in the glass. I no longer saw the dismissed employee or the so-called traitor. I saw the woman who had rewritten her story. I smiled and whispered to myself, sometimes the best revenge is not to make them fall, but to make them see you standing there, steady, impossible to forget. Then I turned off the lights, leaving only the window light falling on the bonsai, a small emblem of survival, its new shoot tilted in the breeze as if nodding in agreement. And I knew everything that needed to be said had been said.